Nobody Studios is a high-velocity, crowd-infused venture studio that's disrupting the world of startups. Their mission is to create 100 companies in 5 years through an ongoing equity crowdfunding campaign. Barry O'Reilly is co-founder and chief incubation officer at Nobody Studios and two-time best-selling author of Unlearn and Lean Enterprise and part of the Eric Ries Lean series and Harvard Business Review, which is a must-read for CEO and business leaders. So, hello, Barry. Welcome to Startup Podcast. We're very honored and we're very happy to have you here.
Yeah, no, look, the pleasure's all mine. It's great to be on the show and speak to all your fantastic listeners in the Philippines and around the world.
Yeah, I'm very excited to learn more about Nobody Studios and actually your life. You're currently based in the Philippines. Yeah. So they started Nobody Studios. So what really is Nobody Studios?
Yeah, so Nobody Studios is a crowd-infused, high-velocity venture studio with the goal to launch 100 companies over the next 5 years. And when often people hear the term venture studio, it's often a new term for people. Sometimes people think of it as a startup studio. And really our goal is to raise capital to build companies that we're really passionate about, to incubate and bring them to life. So again, when sometimes people hear venture studio, they think we're venture capitalists, but we're more than that. And they when we hear incubation, they think we just incubate companies. So with a venture studio, you take all of those components and you roll them into one. So we raise our own capital to create companies and fund companies that we believe in. We incubate ideas or teams or companies that we believe in to help them accelerate their growth for early stage businesses. So if you think as a VC is often gives capital but no support, or an incubator often has great ideas but no capital, and an accelerator takes a part of your company for some mentorship, but we're actually co-founders of all these businesses. So we currently have 11 companies in production, 4 in market. And as you said, we're doing an equity crowdfunding. So we're one of the first ever venture studios to let anyone that's retail investors own a piece of the studio, and by default, every company we create. So it's a really compelling financial innovation that typically to invest in early stage companies, you have to be in the US, you have to be a multimillionaire or an accredited investor. But we've flipped the whole model on its head. Now anyone can be a venture investor. If they've got $100, they can invest in Nobody Studios and own a piece of the studio and every company we create. So we're definitely disrupting not only the startup world, but also the financial and funding world. And we're having a lot of fun along the way.
Yeah, I think it's a very new and unique and actually innovative business or venture building model, as you said. I think I'd like to learn more about that later. We can decompose that, like what's a venture really, what is venture building, what is high velocity, what is crowd infused. But it's actually very fascinating that, as you've said, it's like mixing, combining the you're more than a VC, you're more than an incubator, you're more than an accelerator. You're like all of this in one, and you're really helping more businesses and more startups probably grow, and you're also actually like getting more people into investing into getting a piece of this promising startups or businesses. But can we go first to the backstories? Can we go first also to your stories as right now the chief incubation officer at Nobody Studio? So how did it all start? And can I also ask what got you in the Philippines? You're in the Philippines right now, and are you looking for maybe Filipino ventures, Philippine businesses to be onboarded at Nobody Studios?
Yeah, so the answer is yes to all of those and more. You know, I've a kind of lived in 7 different countries now at this stage. When I finished university, I moved to San Francisco, and I was part of an early stage startup called citysearch.com. And it was my first startup experience and really fun. Our number one competitor was Zip2. Are you familiar with Zip2?
Yeah, I think I've seen that before. Yeah.
Yeah, it was Elon Musk's first company.
Yeah.
So we were going to merge with Elon's and his brother's company, but it ended up the merger didn't work out, and they sold their company and we sold ours to Ticketmaster. And then on the back of that, I moved back to Edinburgh and started a mobile games development company. So it was very early, when just after phones were sort of the old Nokia bricks, and we put small virtual machines and connectivity in phones. So we started building these games, and then suddenly nobody was really doing it. And then I had Sony and Sega and Disney like ringing us up to start. So I built Lilo and Stitch, the computer game for Disney, and again, that was a really fun startup to get that off the ground. And then I did some education. I moved to Australia, moved to London, and joined a company called ThoughtWorks, which has sort of pioneered the agile software development. And that's when I wrote the books. The lean startup movement was kicking off. I got to work with Ries and various different people in that movement to bring it together. And then, yeah, after that, I've just been sort of working in startups and advising companies ever since. But I got to the point where I was living in San Francisco again for the last 6 years. And, I just realized that I wanted to put more of my energy into not just doing one startup, but doing multiple startups simultaneously and in quick succession. I felt like innovation cycles were happening faster, companies were rising and falling sooner. So really what you needed was a business that could create startups really fast and then exit them really quickly. And that's why I landed on this idea of a venture studio after meeting Mark McNally, our other chief nobody. So we started that business in the middle of COVID at the beginning of sort of January 2020. At the time, I was living in San Francisco. My wife actually happens to work for the World Health Organization. She was asked or offered the opportunity to come to Manila in the Philippines. It's the headquarter for the Asia Pacific region for the United Nations and World Health Organization. So we moved here a year ago, and I've been thoroughly enjoying my time in the Philippines, meeting a lot of venture builders, startup founders here. A lot of already we've got I think we've got like 4 employees based in Cebu who run all our social media and design for Nobody Studios. One of our largest investors is based here. Also, one of the development agencies that build one of our companies, Parentipity, is based here. So there's already a strong Filipino thread within Nobody Studios. We are globally and irrational by design. Like we've people working in 30 countries. So yeah, if you're a startup founder out there and you're looking for an interesting way to help bring your idea to life, I'd encourage you to get in touch. If you're an investor who's like, I'm looking for a different type of investment, please do get in touch with me. But it's an amazing country, such a young population. I think over 50%, I think, are under 25, the highest percentage of crypto wallets of any country in the world. There's a lot of really fascinating innovation happening here. And it's funny, I went for lunch with a friend, Xavier, who was the first CEO of Gcash. And when I see these sort of super apps that are like just taking hold of not only Philippines, but all of the whole region and ultimately the world, it's just exciting to see, how much innovation is happening. And I'm excited to hopefully meet more people here who are building and maybe could even build with Nobody Studios.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I mean, why the name Nobody Studios? I mean, why Nobody? I mean, why is there any reason to having that name? I mean, is it like is it like a symbol, or like does it have a meaning basically?
Yeah, no, everything has a meaning in our studio. Yeah, like it's kind of but a bit of a fun thing, right? Like a lot of people, like we have investors who are senior executives in companies like Google, Stripe, Facebook, TikTok, you name it. And often people sort of feel like they spend their whole life trying to become somebody. But what you learn about when you're like building companies is that being able to park your ego at the door and being truly open to collaborating and working with people actually sort of requires you to sort of dissolve yourself, if you will, and sort of think of yourself as a nobody, right? And so this is why we called it Nobody Studios. We want people to sort of park their ego at the door to bring their personality and their openness. So it doesn't matter if you were the former CEO of Coca-Cola, who's one of our investors, or you're a crowdfunder who put in $100. Everyone's ideas have merit. Everyone can contribute. And really, that's the business that we're trying to create and the community that we're trying to create those companies.
Amazing, amazing. It's very fascinating to hear about this, because it's actually one of the things I've been thinking about recently. Like, do people drive startups or businesses or ideas, or is it the other way around? Do businesses or startups or ideas drive those people? So I'm like, I mean like, what's really going on? I mean, what's really like the driving force behind all of this? Anyway, let's go to Nobody Studios as a venture studio. Can we just decompose this? Can we just go deeper? I mean, what do we really mean when we say venture? And I'm also curious. I mean, i- is Nobody Studios or is a venture studio kind of new, kind of unique, or are there any other venture studios out there? Can we can you just know more about that?
Yeah, so venture studios have been around for a very long time in some respects, but they were sort of a small group. Actually, City Search, which was the first company I ever worked for, was a company that was born out of the very first venture studio in the US, Idea Lab, that was run by Bill Gross. And he had the idea that he would create a studio where they would try to come up with startup ideas and launch these technology businesses. And unbeknownst to me, that's where my first ever company I worked in, City Search, was sort of born from. And over time, the sort of industry has evolved relatively quickly, especially in the last sort of 5 years. Venture studios have grown by 625%. So it's sort of an emerging asset class where people recognize that there might be efficiencies by creating focused portfolios either around business domains. So you often have venture studios that are focused around SaaS products, as an example. One that all the crypto fans out there might be aware of is one called Consensus. So that was set up by Joe Lubin, who was one of the co-founders of Ethereum. And Consensus was designed to build out the ecosystem around blockchain. So a good example is that they create the crypto wallets and so forth. That MetaMask being an example that came out of that venture studio. But our venture studio is very much focused around. We sort of call ourselves equal opportunity innovators. We're domain agnostic. We have some natural concentrations around specific areas where we have a lot of expertise and investors. So health and wellness is a big one for us, travel and hospitality, creator communities. So there's a natural sort of focus area for us in the beginning, but yeah, we've a very, very broad portfolio and growing quickly.
Yeah. Can we know some of the startups or companies that are currently in your portfolio, and probably like maybe in the Philippines for Filipino founders listening to this episode? So like, um, what's like, how do you decide or how do you choose basically those startups or companies that you will maybe venture with in the future? So like, can you just know a bit of this, your portfolio and
Yeah,
like your decision making process?
absolutely. Yeah. So ideas sort of happen in three ways in the studios. First of all, we have our own ideas. So companies we believe in that we want to start and found. One example of that would be Ovations. It's an on-demand events and speaker platform for virtual events. The founder of that company is Ray Leonard Jr., Sugar Ray Leonard's son, the six-time world champion boxer. So his son was a very prestigious speaker. When COVID hit, he couldn't do any more in-person events and conferences. So he wanted to do it digitally. And, he's someone who saw one of the companies that we were building in the studio and sort of took an active part in helping bring that company to life. Ovations is actually built on top of another one of our companies called Thoughtforma. And this was two brothers who created a no-code, low-code platform where I met them at a conference actually 4 years ago. And when we were starting the studio, I knew that we needed to create this notion of a platform that other companies we could be built on top of. So we needed a no-code solution. And so it's better we have that in our portfolio and build companies like Ovations on top of it. So we get a win-win. And they were two people who'd been working on a product for a period of time. They hadn't had external investment. But the studio could essentially like bring them into the studio and fund them so they could work on their idea full time. And we also have Parentipity, which is an online parent creator community where parents are paid for giving tips on parenting with one another. We've got Webdelics, which is the sort of WebMD of psychedelics. So another emergent field where psychedelics is now starting to become a major treatment for PTSD and people with mental health issues. So we've created a platform where people can educate themselves on the pros and cons of psychedelics. It's called Webdelics. And then from there, like the portfolio really just sort of explodes. We've got such a fascinating and broad array of companies. Like all the time, it sort of gets me excited. Everything from one company called Sleep Glide, where we're working with Dr. Gina Poe. She was the head of the sleep lab at Harvard for a number of years. She's now at UCLA. She's one of the top three probably researchers of sleep and dreams on the planet. We're building a company with her around creating predictive sleep algorithms. So there's just like such a broad array of companies. And I'd recommend people go to nobodystudios.com and look at what we're doing to learn more.
For a venture builder, I'm very curious about this because uh, a venture studio is quite different with like a VC, an incubator, an accelerator. So how, like, when you meet someone, when someone offers you a deal, or when someone wants to be part of Nobody Studio, so like, how do you decide? Do you look at the person? Do you look at the business, the profitability? I mean, maybe even like those values that you're aligned with. Like, how is the selection? Maybe, I mean, what's the thought process behind choosing those ventures that you will go and build with?
Yeah, so the answer is all of those aspects, right? When we think about companies that we either want to create ourselves, or when we meet entrepreneurs who could potentially come into the studio to build with us, we'll always look at the problem domain and see, is that a problem we believe in and feel like it needs to be worth solved? We'll look at the product. What's their vision for either a prototype they might have, or a working prototype, or product. And the team is a huge important part of that. Like, do we have the expertise internally to execute on the idea, or the team? And can we build the support mechanism around a team to make them be successful? And then we're really like looking at things like traction. Like, what have they actually been able to get a foothold in the market, learn that the idea actually has merit? And that really is sort of what it comes down to. Like, the market as well. Like, is it somewhere where we think that if the problem they're solving has a chance to, the product that they're building, the team can execute, that they've got early signs of traction, and they're in a market that we think can grow? That's how we start making decisions, right? And it's always fun, whether we're internally looking at companies that we want to build, or we meet these entrepreneurs who are looking for co-founders to help them bring their idea to life. And it's a fascinating and fun job. And like I said, we've 11 companies now in production, 4 in market. We're trying to launch another 10 companies this year. We just announced one other new company joining the studio, the Adjacent Possible, which is focused around intellectual property rights management and patenting, which again is great for the studio because all of our startups need intellectual property support and patent support. So it's really starting to gain momentum, and bring all these businesses together, and it's an exciting time.
Yeah, and with a venture studio, I think it's like more independent. Like, it can be more aligned with like the values and the culture of the co-founders. But I also want to ask, how close do you work with these businesses? For example, you said that you have 11 now in your portfolio, but you'll be launching 10 in the future. So are these all like pre-launch ventures when you onboard them, or like um you can also like partner up or build with a currently built and ongoing company? So what's the picture? What does the picture look like?
Yeah, so most our preference is always that, especially if it's our own idea, we'll start with a post-it note and look to bring it to a prototype, right? So that's with our own ideas. But often when we meet entrepreneurs, we generally are looking for very early stage, like pre-seed startups. So ideally have not had any funding, maybe beyond friends and family. So very the earliest stage of startup building. And that's where we think we can have the most effect, because a lot of us have been involved in many startups. We're co-founders with these entrepreneurs, right? We're not
I see.
like, you can go to Y Combinator and they'll give you $250,000 and take 8% of your company, and you've 12 weeks to prove to them why they should give you more money. And regardless of the outcome, you get the money, they take the percentage of the company, and that's it. But it's really just a sprint to build a prototype and see if you can be successful. We're much more than that. We're actually co-founders of the business with you. So when we invest in startups, we typically put in $250,000 over a year, but we're co-founders, right? So typically we have majority ownership actually of a lot of these companies that we're incubating
Mm,
because we want to see them successful. We are co-founders of those businesses. You've access to all of the senior leadership team, all of our resources, all of our teams. And that's actually for many entrepreneurs a great way to bring their business to life. And Dr. Gina Poe is a great example, right? She's the world's leading researcher on sleep and dreams, but she doesn't build technology products. She's an expert in understanding sleep and dreams research, but
uh,
we're experts in building digital products. So when we pair up together, that's where we start to actually get 1 + 1 = 11, and it'd be a really powerful collaboration for everybody.
I got it. I got it. So it's really more of a VC because usually VCs provide investments, networks, but really it's what a venture studio can provide is beyond that. And it's also greater than an incubator or an accelerator program because you really build, you really co-found, you're also part responsible actually for the entire startup building or company building process. You mentioned that it's actually like the tagline of Nobody Studios. Nobody Studios is a high velocity crowd-infused venture studio. Let's go first to high velocity. So what do we mean by high velocity? I mean, and how do you do it? How do you plan to create 100 companies in 5 years? So what's the thoughts behind this?
Yeah, so one of the most important things about when you're starting a business is to have a big, hairy, audacious goal. I think Jim Collins calls it a BHAG. So when we started the studio, we knew that we didn't want to do just like one or two companies a year. We wanted to do something transformational. And that's sort of what brought us to the idea of a venture studio, but at a high velocity. Innovation cycles are faster, companies rise and fall quicker. So we wanted to build a machine, if you will, to create companies at a high velocity so we can build them cheaply and exit them really fast. And this is why this goal of 100 companies over 5 years is sort of an ambition for us. And when people hear it, they sort of think, oh, you're going to do 20 companies a year for 5 years. That sounds like a lot. But we're actually sort of starting small and scaling up. So in our first year in 2020, we did 3 companies. We did Ovations, Thoughtforma, right, and Parentipity. And that sort of was the way that we learned how to build companies together with a small group of people. We built some early systems and structures about how we believed we would build companies. Then in our next year, our plan was to do 5 companies, but we ended up doing 8. So it's sort of like you're all the time we're building up, like growing 50% sort of year over year. And as we're doing that, we're scaling our systems, we're building our capabilities, we're maturing more of a business. So last year we thought we'd do 5 companies, and this year our plan is to do 9. But because we did 8 last year, I think we should shoot for 10. And you'll see then as we just start building this up. So we go from 3 to 5 to 10 to 20 to 40. And then suddenly we're at 100 companies over the next 5 years.
But how does that machine work? I mean, I'm also interested to know like how large is the studio? I mean, who are the people behind the studio? I mean, how do you I mean how do you do this high velocity venture building? I mean, what's happening behind?
Yeah, well, at some level, we have people that work in the studio. It's actually quite a small team. We've people that lead different functions. So myself, I'm the chief incubation officer. We have a CEO, head of operations, financial officer, head of marketing. And then we have a couple of people that support the different teams based on the stage of development that they're in. But everybody else is primarily working within new companies. So we're building the sort of systems at the studio level to support these companies. But all the companies actually have teams that are building themselves. So, we're pretty quickly getting towards like 60 people sort of involved in the studio. Plus, we have a bunch of experts that we can pull in to help companies with very specific tasks, like how they might go to market or how to build a really good social media strategy or how to identify who their target market is. So between our investors, people who work in the studio, the people who are sort of on our bench, as well as the builders themselves, it gets pretty big pretty quickly. But we're learning and building these systems over time, and we're scaling the staff and the studio and the systems as we create more companies and obviously raise more capital, because people start to see what we're doing and they want to invest more in what we're doing. And now there's a huger opportunity with this equity crowdfunding that anyone will be able to invest in the studio and own a piece of it, and all these companies that we create. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, speaking of this, so let's go to this crowd infused part of Nobody Studio. So you're actually you have an ongoing equity crowdfunding campaign. First, what do you mean by equity crowdfunding? And second, like what do you imagine? Like if I'm an investor, if I'm interested to like invest in Nobody Studios, do I invest? I mean, it's just a question. Like, do I invest in the studio or do I invest in the companies that the studio is building? I mean, I'm just I just want to know like what possibly can go in the minds of those who will probably invest in the studio.
So equity crowdfunding, even in itself, is sort of a financial innovation that's really only happened in the sort of last 5 years. So in the very, very beginning, if you were an entrepreneur and you wanted to raise money to build a business, you had to go to a bank. So you would walk into a bank and go, "Hi, my name's Barry. I'm building a technology product in the health and wellness space to help people with mental health." And a bank manager who probably knew nothing about startups, nothing about technology, nothing really about you, would sit there and decide if they would give you money to fund your business. So most of the time they would say, "No, this is a high risk loan. I'm not going to give it to the person." But then as time sort of moved on, a lot of entrepreneurs who sort of built businesses and sold them suddenly started to say, "Well, hang on a sec. Why don't we invest the money that we've made through selling our companies in other entrepreneurs to help them get started?" And that's how venture capital started. It was very much other entrepreneurs investing in early stage businesses. That's literally how venture capital began. And then over time, it's just a small group of people that could make these investments. And they were obviously seeing a lot of success. And then some new models started to emerge, like crowdfunding. So people were like, well, rather than just raise money from like 2 or 3 very wealthy individuals, why don't we use lots of people and let them put in a small amount and raise capital? But for most people, crowdfunding was always about, you would sort of fund a company to create a product that you might like. So Pebble Watch is probably the most famous one, where you could go on to Kickstarter and pay $50. And Pebble would send you the watch that they plan to build if you funded the product. But you never owned a piece of the company. You just got the product. So equity funding is this sort of next innovation where instead of funding companies to build products, you actually own that company. So if I funded Pebble, I could own a piece of Pebble and maybe get the watch. All right. And that's what equity crowdfunding was about. And the sort of really far end of this that you see now is in the crypto space, where people will launch NFTs and people can buy a token and for a company or a project that they like. And by purchasing that token, they raise capital for that project to fund itself. So really, equity crowdfunding is sort of like this middle step in between, where now you can actually crowdfund the funding of businesses to exist. And as you fund that company, you own a piece of it.
Yeah.
So that's what equity crowdfunding is about.
Yeah. Just for our listeners, maybe who are interested to partake in this equity crowdfunding and probably invest in Nobody Studio. So how can they exactly be profitable? Like do they possibly profit when the company that's a venture of the studio exits, or can they sell their equity to other people probably at a higher price? I mean, how exactly can they probably gain money?
Yeah, that's it. So in the first instance, we're running an equity crowdfunding at the moment, so people can invest and own a piece of the studio, right? And those investment options range from $100 right up to like $50,000. Now, when you invest in the studio, you instantly own a piece of the studio, and by default, you get a relative proportion of whatever you own in the studio in each of the companies that we create. So typically, if you own like 1% of Nobody Studios, and we launch a new company that we might own 70% of, you would own 1% of the 70% that we own, right? So it propagates into every single company we create. So it's actually like a diversified investment straight from the start.
Yes.
Because you own the studio, and then every company we create, you own a piece of that. So as we start exiting these companies in probably 18 months to 2 years' time, you would sort of get the equivalent of a dividend every time we sell one of these companies. And because we're doing 100 companies, we're only modeling to sell 50 of them over the next 8 years. So that means you could get like essentially 50 dividends distributions over the next 8 years for sort of owning a piece of the studio now. Which will, and just to give you an example, like if you invested $1,000 in the studio and we sold a company for $90 million, and say we owned, 30% of that company at that time, what we do is we take the 30% of the 90, so we'll just say like 30 million. We take 30% of our profit, so about 9 million, put that back into the studio to build more companies, and then of the remaining 21 million, we give that back to our shareholders, 70%. So if you had invested $1,000 in Nobody Studios and we sell a company for $90 million, which, as crazy as it sounds, is not a lot of money in startup world, if it's a successful company around Series B, all of those people would get pretty much about $450 back. They'd get half of their principal back from just one exit. So if we're trying to build 100 and we expect to exit 50, and if you put in $1,000 and we're exiting most of them at around to sort of under $100 million, you can expect to be getting almost half your principal back every time we've an exit. So it becomes a dividend paying machine over time. And if you own shares in a company that's paying dividends at that level, the shares will probably be worth, a huge amount, probably even at like 1,000% more than they're worth today.
Yeah, this is a very new, actually, this is a very innovative financial model, investing model. It's really fascinating to hear about all of this. Going back to let's say a startup founder or someone who wants to start a company. Why? I mean, for example, a startup founder will go to a VC because he needs money. Basically, he needs capital. A startup founder will go to an incubator or an accelerator program, maybe to gain mentorship, to gain network. But why exactly will a startup founder maybe go to Nobody Studios? I mean, can you just can you just know the accurate answer to that question?
Yeah, well, the good example is we've already have like at least 3 or 4 companies that have gone through this. And what we've learned from all of them is that these were all great entrepreneurs, like they had great ideas. So why would somebody want to join the studios as an entrepreneur? Well, we've already got some examples of that, right, with Thoughtforma and Jason Possible. And one of the things we've learned about those entrepreneurs is that they could see the opportunity, of course, of starting a company and building it on their own and raising capital on their own and building a team on their own. But they also saw the opportunity of being part of something bigger and being part of a portfolio of companies that they could actually work together with to build not only the value of their company, but the value of a portfolio. So another one of the unique innovations for Nobody Studios is if you're a company inside our portfolio, not only do you earn equity in your portfolio company, but you also earn equity in Nobody Studios as well. So by sort of definition, you sort of have this chance to be part of something exceptional, like starting your own company, but you also are part of a portfolio that you're earning equity in as well. So if a company that you're working with is successful and has an exit, you get paid money.
I see.
If your company is successful, you get paid money. So it's actually a collaborative incentive system. So companies like Thoughtforma that are building Ovations, they want to see Ovations succeed, because if it does, they'll see a payout. They'll see financial upside from that as much as they get to collaborate with an early customer that helps them make their platform more robust. So we think it's a really unique incentive system. And it draws a certain type of character. If you're an entrepreneur and you want to build the startup from your garage and raise the money, ring your bell at the NASDAQ and go all on your own, we will cheer you on. We'll be like, perfect, go for it, good luck. But I think for entrepreneurs who recognize that they might need help, that they might be an excellent technical co-founder, but struggle with marketing, sales, business development, talent, it's sort of unrealistic. I sometimes think we sort of build up founders to believe that they can do everything. And most people just start off with having an idea one day and working on it, and maybe they're an engineer or maybe they're a great salesperson. But then suddenly we expect them to know everything about running a business, sales, marketing, HR, talent acquisition, software development. Like these are huge areas to learn. And it's sort of impossible for one person to do it all, and the value of a studio is you can be a great entrepreneur and then you have a whole load of support capabilities around you that allow you to scale faster and quicker. And the other thing I notice is entrepreneurs rarely have just one idea that they want to work on for the rest of their life. They have an idea they want to work on probably for 4 or 5 years and then go on to something else. And the studio sort of facilitates you to do that, right? If you're in a sort of big startup and you try to build a unicorn, you've got to work. A unicorn takes 14 years to build on average. Working on the same problem for 14 years. Do you want to do that? And I can't tell you how many founders I've met who, like, the sort of dirty secret is they're like, if I could tomorrow, I'd leave this business, but I can't because people have invested in me, because I'm the face of the company, because, right? And you see that, like, I think even most recently, even the Airbnb founder, like one of the 3 left. Because, like, I'm sure, at some point you get bored of just like trying to organize for people to rent other people's houses out, and they want to work on other things. That's why they invest in other companies, because they want to play in different domains, right? And so I think it's just recognizing that's what entrepreneurs often think like. Rather than they just want to do one company, they want to do many companies and in quick succession. And I think the studio is perfect for that.
Yeah, I really like this model because it also like promotes the collaboration between entrepreneurs and really like working together. I really like providing incentive. I mean, because usually we have incentive for competition, for like competing, but with this kind of model, we also have like incentives with cooperating, with collaboration. And I think it's a good, for me, it's a good value that probably we get to see, we get to discover, we get to know more about. Thank you, Barry, for sharing about Venture Studios, about your plans at Nobody Studios. Can we know maybe some top 3 learnings or advice maybe for startup founders or maybe for startup enablers, even like you venturers? So can we just know probably like 3 biggest lessons or advice or words of wisdom for anyone who's into the startup world?
Yeah, so I think, one of the things I've learned is it takes time to build something really big and something really successful. We've been working on the studio for over 2 years now, and I still feel like we're only getting started. And I think sometimes we can be very hard on ourselves and expect that everything needs to happen really quickly or we're not making progress. But great businesses take a long time to build. So that's been one of my constant reminders to myself. The other is like managing energy. One of the toughest things about trying to build a business is you have to put a lot of energy into it to get it moving, get the momentum going. And it's very easy, like, to sort of spend, night and day just working on the company, evenings, weekends, every waking moment. And I think one of the things I've become very conscious of is managing energy and burnout, like being very conscious of setting some sort of boundaries about understanding sometimes you might have to work hard a little bit extra, but sustaining that for long periods of time is not healthy. And it's only a matter of time until you sort of break. Ultimately, that's what happens.
I agree.
And then the last thing for me really is sort of really instituting a sort of whole life balance. When people talk about work-life balance, I think it's a bit of a misnomer. I just don't have two modes. I've got work, I've got life, I've got my family, I've got my relationships, my friends, and my health. And I think one of the things that's been so important for me is to really institute a system where I'm doing exercise every day. So I book doing exercise like I book meetings. I block it out. It's in my calendar. I do it. And eating healthy, sleeping well. It's one of the things about working in a venture studio when you've got one of the world's leading researchers on sleep and dreams. I'm telling you, as an older man these days, sleep is so important. It regenerates us. If we don't get good sleep, it has a huge impact on us. So I've learned a lot of these things that are support systems around, helping me build a business for the long term, managing my energy and burnout, and creating a system that looks at all parts of my life, my relationships, my health, my eating, exercise, to help me perform at my best. And that's been a huge part of helping, I believe, me be the most successful I could, which I couldn't have done in my 20s because I didn't even think about my health and my sleep and my eating and I just thought about working hard and then living hard. So I think that's going to be one of the big ahas for me as building these sort of companies. Is they're really important lessons.
Yes, thank you very much for that, Barry. For our last question, I've noticed from you and actually from Nobody Studios website, Nobody Studios is actually also like promoting an inclusive culture within the organization and actually with the ventures that are that the studio is building with. So what really, I mean, do you have a vision? Like, do you have something that you want to change maybe in how entrepreneurial world runs right now? I mean, do you have something that you want to change or to disrupt or to revolutionize with everything? What's really also, because I think that Nobody Studios is a very ambitious and innovative project, but I think there's something more behind. There's something more like in the values, in the philosophy. So can we know like the deeper vision, the deeper philosophy behind all of this?
Yeah, well, like one of our sort of values is irrationally global, and so we want to have a venture studio in every continent in the world. Currently, the only place we don't have one is in Africa. So we've teams in the Americas. I'm here in Asia. We've people in Europe, but we don't have somewhere in Africa yet, right? But all of our teams are globally distributed. I think we've like investors in 30 countries, teams in 17. Like it's all over the world, and that's really special to us. And I think if you asked our chief nobody, Mark McNally, somebody asked him like what was his definition of success for the studio, and I really liked his answer. He was like, we know we'll have succeeded when an entrepreneur from a country that we've never been to comes up with an idea that we disagree with, but launches the business in Nobody Studios, builds it and sells it, and we wouldn't even have believed it was possible, but it happened. And like for us, that's sort of what we think is success, is giving people who are in all over the world equal opportunity to innovate and bring their businesses to market. And when we start to achieve that, I think it'll be a happy day for all of us. So if you're in the Philippines and you want to build companies, get in touch at nobodystudios.com. If you want to become a venture investor for $100 or more, go to republic.com/nobodystudios, and then you can sort of see where you could become a venture investor or builder or just simply a nobody and cheer us along.
Yeah, actually, I'm interested. I'll go to those links later. So I'll also post those links below. So thank you very much, Barry. This is a really, really, really wonderful conversation with you. I really enjoyed it. I actually learned a lot, and I hope our listeners learned a lot from you and from Nobody Studios, and actually like what's really going on, what you're really trying to do, what you're really trying to build. So thank you very much, Barry, for this conversation.
Salama, thank you.